Uh, this morning we're going to be taking a look at Mark chapter 11. Mark chapter 11, and as if you're flipping there, the passage will be up on the screens. You can go to the Bible app, and the notes are there. But as you're finding Mark chapter 11, I just want to tell you there was a story that Chuck Swindoll told in one of his books, and I thought it was a pretty good story, and so I want to share it with you. He was telling of a time that there was a young man and a woman down in Long Beach, California. They wanted to go on a date. They thought it would be fun to have a little picnic out in the park overlooking the beach, and they wanted to have some, easy takeout. So they stopped by this fried chicken restaurant on the way to the park. Well, when the young man went into the restaurant to get his chicken, he ordered, his food. And apparently it had been like a newer girl doing the cash register and stuff. And so when she went to go grab, it was close to the end of the day. They were getting ready to close. And when she went to go grab the bag that she thought was his food, and this must have been a long time ago because I don't see them doing this anymore. But apparently one of the registers had been cleared out, and the manager had put the money in a bag, but it had been placed next to the food bag, and the lady had accidentally grabbed the money bag and given it to the young man as his food, and so he took it, and, being in a hurry to get out and enjoy the sunset with his date, he didn't look, he just took the food and left. Well, they drove to the park and got all their spot picked out and ready to watch the sunset and eat some delicious fried chicken, and went to open the bag and looked inside, and instead of finding his food, found $800 in cash. Well, the young man, being upstanding, being a good guy, right? He says, well, this isn't ours. We can't keep this. We've got to go give it back. And so he quickly jumps back in the car and makes his way back to the restaurant. And as they're locking the doors, he kind of bangs on the door. But he notices that inside the manager is just like frantic, like pulling his hair out, and the young cash register girl looks like she's been crying and probably been yelled at. The guy's just pounding. Look, I've got your money. So the manager all of a sudden looks up, got these big, great eyes, like, yes! So he comes to the door, opens the door, and the guy goes, look, hey, here's your money, right? I'm sorry, I didn't mean to take it. It was handed to me, and I just was in a hurry, so I didn't check, but I wanted to make sure you got your money back. And the manager was just like overwhelmed. It was just so grateful. He looked at the guy and he's like, oh, this is so amazing. You have no idea how much problem this was going to cause us. I know this was our mistake, but I'm so grateful that you were willing to come back with the money. And the guy's like, yeah, don't worry about it. The manager says, I don't know anybody else who would have returned this money. I mean, this is almost $1,000. I really want to do something for you. You know what? I'm going to even call the paper, and I want them to take your picture, and I want people to know that you are such a good guy. I mean, that you would be willing to do this. And the guy says, no, don't do that. We don't need to do that. And the manager's like, yeah, come on. Other people need to know how amazing this is, that there are still good people in the world. And the guy says, no. You don't understand. And he leans closer, and he says, you can't take my picture. That's not my wife. Sometimes we get caught up in looking really good on the outside, but there are some problems that we've got to deal with. And this morning in Mark chapter 11, we're going to talk about a story that explains that a lot. We're talking about a time when Jesus curses a tree. So if you're there, let's follow along. It's in Mark chapter 11, and we're going to start in verse 12. Verse 12, it says, the next day, as they were leaving Bethany, Jesus was hungry. Seeing in the distance a fig tree and leaf, he went to find out if it had any fruit. When he reached it, he found nothing but leaves, because it was not the season for figs. Then he said to the tree, may no one ever eat fruit from you again. And his disciples heard him say it. On reaching Jerusalem, Jesus entered the temple courts, and began driving out those who were buying and selling there. He overturned the tables of the money changers and the benches of those selling doves, and would not allow anyone to carry merchandise through the temple courts. And as he taught them, he said, is it not written, my house will be called a house of prayer for all nations? But you have made it a den of robbers. The chief priests and the teachers of the law heard this and began looking for a way to kill him, for they feared him, because the whole crowd was amazed at his teaching. When evening came, Jesus and his disciples went out from the city. In the morning, as they went along, they saw the fig tree withered from the roots. Peter remembered and said to Jesus, "Rabbi, look, the fig tree you cursed has withered." Now, I don't know about you, but there are a lot of people, myself included, who, when you read this for the first time, or even the 10th or 12th time, or even the 100th time, can seem a little difficult. I mean, when you first just read this, when you take it without any context, when you just look at this, there's a whole lot of things that seem really difficult about this passage because, well, let's talk about this. I mean, what are we used to seeing Jesus do? What are we used to seeing Jesus accomplish? I mean, for the entire Gospel of Mark, Jesus has made lame people walk. He has made blind people see. He has helped people with withered hands. He has done all kinds of things to help the broken become unbroken, right? He has acted in kindness. He has acted in compassion. He has done everything he can to lift people up. And when you get to this, all of a sudden, Jesus is cursing something. And it just seems way out of character for Jesus to take the time to walk up to something, to a tree, and say, "You know what, you're no good. I'm getting rid of you." When you guys read that, what do you see? What do you think? Are you going, "Oh yeah, that makes sense, all right, sounds good"? I don't know. A lot of people, when they read it, here are some things, right? They see this and they think, okay, this to me, and I'm not speaking for myself, but some people will see this and say, hey, this to me shows that God couldn't have been, or Jesus couldn't have been God, right? God is omniscient. He knows all things. He is all-knowing. And so if Jesus didn't know that there were no figs on this tree, that means he couldn't have been God, right? Or, they look at this and they say Jesus couldn't be God because Jesus is being selfish. Jesus is being kind of spoiled and a brat. I mean, who else that we know of would walk up to a tree when it's not the time for fruit to be on this tree and get upset and throw a tantrum when they don't find something they know shouldn't be there? There are all kinds of reasons why people look at this and they struggle because it just seems so out of character for Jesus. It seems so out of place that Jesus would be looking for figs when they're not in season, or that he would lose his cool and get angry at a tree. Right? There are all these things that people look at or that they think about when they read this passage and they go, man, this just does not make sense. This is difficult. This is one of those hard sayings of Jesus. Like, how are we supposed to make sense of this? I don't know. What do you guys think? You probably all are much more mature than I am, and so you didn't even question this, right? But when you read it, what do you think? Has it ever made sense to you? Have you studied it enough that you know, the tree is no big deal, I got this? Well, this morning, I'm going to try to help you understand what is going on here, why Jesus would even do this, why it would even appear in the Gospel of Mark. See, that's the other thing, is that a lot of people would look at this and go, this does not make Jesus look good. Why would Mark include it? Somebody must have added it later because they didn't want Jesus getting too much glory or something. Somebody must have added it later, and it was just kind of there to mess with the gospel. But no, this is something Mark wanted us to hear. So let's talk about this cursing of the fig tree. How about this? I'll just tell you the answer from the beginning so that you know. The fig tree is the temple. There you go. Have a good week. See you later. Okay. The fig tree is a representation of the temple, okay? And this is going to be something that is to help the disciples understand what is coming. They need to understand other difficult things that Jesus has to teach them. And so one of the ways that Jesus can help them understand and show them what is coming, what is happening, is that he can use this tree as what is called a living parable. Instead of just telling them a story, it's like an object lesson for kids. I mean, we can understand that. Sometimes the disciples needed that, right? They needed it brought down to here, this is how it works. Because I need that all the time. So Jesus is making kind of an object lesson for his disciples. And we know that this tree represents the temple for several different reasons. The first of which being that this is a Markan sandwich. Are you guys hungry? I'm hungry. So I'm thinking about sandwiches. This is a Mark sandwich. And so throughout the gospel, if you've noticed, we've kind of talked about it, but we've gone over how Mark will start telling one story, right? And he'll get to like the middle of the story, the climax of the story, and then all of a sudden the story goes away and he starts talking about something else. And he'll tell about a different part of Jesus' life or actions, and then he'll go back to the original story and tell you the end of it. And so there's this sandwich created between the one story with another one in the middle, right? And so it's a way for Mark to give some understanding, some commentary. It's a way for this gospel to help explain some of the more difficult things that Jesus had to talk about. He would tell you one story that gave you some context to what was coming, and then he would tell you the difficult thing, and then he would give you the ending of the first story so that hopefully when it's told in that whole, you would begin to get an understanding of what the middle part really meant. And so when Jesus first encounters the tree and curses the tree because there's no fruit, it's for us to understand that something is coming, that something more difficult is going to be taught by Jesus, and we need better understanding of it. And so he tells about the tree, and then he goes to the temple. And he does some crazy things in the temple. At least we would consider them crazy, right? And then after everything is done for that day in the temple, Jesus leaves. Let's be honest, Jesus and the disciples, not very wealthy, and so they're not going to stay within Jerusalem where the rates are really high. I mean, it's like, I know we're a small town. I know that it's not, we're not Portland or anything like that, but even here in Klamath Falls, like when graduation comes around, rates within town are like $300 a night at a hotel, where they used to be like 60, it's the same kind of thing going on for Jerusalem during the Passover time. Jesus and the disciples come to town, but there's no place to stay because they don't have that kind of money, but they do have friends, Mary and Martha and Lazarus, who live just outside of the town, like maybe a mile away. So, like me, you stay with friends because it's cheap. But Jesus, after he's done teaching in the temple, he goes out, stays the night, and as they're making their way back into town the next day, the finish of the tree story comes in, the fig tree comes in, where Peter sees that same tree and he's like, wait a minute, Jesus, that's the tree. It's already dead. This story is about the temple because it's in the middle of another story that Mark is trying to use to help us understand what Jesus is doing within the temple. Okay? So that's one reason why I want you to understand that this fig tree represents the temple in Jerusalem. The other is that, we really just don't have... Did any of you have a bar mitzvah by any chance, or a bat mitzvah? I'm just curious. Any of you feel Jewish enough to go through that process? Well, if you understand anything about that, right, that means that if you have gotten to that age, at least it used to be, I don't know if it is anymore, if you were at your bar mitzvah or bat mitzvah, it was because not only were you turning 13 and becoming an adult, but it meant that you had gone through and memorized all of this, right? You had memorized word by word Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. You knew the law. And not only that, you knew the prophets. You could recite them word for word. You could understand where every little tiny word was. I mean, that's the point of the bar mitzvah, was showing that you were ready to be an adult because you knew God's word. And so when we approach Scripture, When we come to the New Testament and we start reading it and we get into things that we don't understand, most of the time it's because they're not just giving us chapter and verse of an Old Testament book. They're just saying something from it and knowing or assuming that the people reading it would have already gone, oh yeah, that's from this book, when the prophet was talking about this, or when Moses was writing about this in Israel's history. And so when we look at these things, we don't have that same context and that same understanding because we just don't know the Old Testament like they did. We don't know things like in Jeremiah chapter 8, when Jeremiah is prophesying about the destruction of Israel the first time and how they had turned away from God. And he writes in chapter 8, "I will take away their harvest, declares the Lord. There will be no grapes on the vine, there will be no figs on the tree, and their leaves will wither. What I have given them will be taken from them." And that's not the only one. The fig tree played an important part throughout the Old Testament history. I mean, even go back to Adam and Eve. What was it that they had used to cover themselves? It's fig leaves. And from then on, the fig tree played an important part within Israel because it was like grapes and figs. That's what they could grow in abundance. I mean, there was olives and all kinds of things. But the fact that there is just a fig tree there that Jesus could walk up and pick figs off of, if there had been any, was a sign that this place, they just grew almost like weeds. And they were delicious. It was an easy source of food for people. Bethany and Bethpage, right? Those two cities are normally together. They were both right next to each other on the Mount of Olives, just outside of Jerusalem. And if you don't know that Bethpage is a Greek translation of a Hebrew word that means house of green figs. This place was supposed to be known for fig trees and figs. And so all of this is all this context, all this information from the Old Testament about how God had talked about the fig tree representing part of the bounty of Israel and the fruitfulness of Israel and the sweetness that they were supposed to have and the peace that they were supposed to have. And whenever they got into trouble, whenever they turned from God and got back into sin and started to fall away and choose to follow anything besides God, that was when those things went away, when God promised that he would take those things away. Right? So there's an Old Testament understanding here that we may not necessarily catch, but these disciples, as they're walking by, maybe they didn't get it right away. Maybe it didn't wholly make sense when they first see Jesus curse this tree, but when they put the whole story together, they've got to know and understand that some change is coming. That God is doing something different. He's moving in a way that they hadn't expected because of sin. Because of people falling away from God. See, here's the thing. When Jesus goes to this tree, when Jesus approaches it, it's because he, from far off, sees that there are leaves, right? He sees that it has all kinds of foliage on it, and that means, well, there's all kinds of arguing about this. See, I know, again, I've told you many times, I don't grow things. I am not any kind of horticulturist. I can't make things grow. But in an effort to try to understand this, because I don't know anything about growing stuff, I was reading about how you do grow trees and what people, fig trees specifically, and how this all played out and why this would be there. And there's all kinds of debate amongst scholars about figs being on the tree or not. But apparently, not just in the Bible, but according to people who actually do this